Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this Blitz chess postmortem. This is a postmortem of my Blitz game number 280. I was white here again, and I kicked off with knight f3. I don't know why I've gotten so many white games in a row, just coincidence. And anyway, my opponent plays knight f6. Very responsible, flexible response to my opening, and now g6. And so I was expecting to get some kind of symmetrical English set up here with c5, which is one of the moves here. Bishop g7 is also a move, and c6 and d6, which my opponent played, is not so common. But you'll see after a few moves, we actually get into a branch of openings that are the numbers start going up again. Let's see. So knight c3. I could just play d4 here. It looks like he's already going for a King's Indian setup, and I could play along with that. But I was still unsure, so I played knight c3, and he castled. I mean, unsure if that was what I wanted to do. But I said, oh, why not? He wants to play a King's Indian. I will let him do that. And, I've got a Fianchetto setup, which I'm not used to in playing the King's Indian. I usually go for the classical setup, but I should probably learn how to play it anyway, so I don't mind this. So he played knight bd7, knight c6 it looks like is an option, or he could try c6 or c5 right away, but get into one of these. And now you see e4 is a very unusual response here. Only 4 times has been played in this position. There doesn't seem to be anything particularly wrong with it, though. It's just the normal move there is castles in this position. And you'll see that from a position with, okay, well, if we back up a few moves, here we were in a position with only 29 games, and as we go forward to here, we've gotten into positions with thousands of games. There's still 800. So after this e4 move, only 4 games where this was played, only 15 games where this was played, but now we're back in, after castles, back in the main line. And it's kind of funny. I mean, it just shows the extent of fashion in chess. Players are used to playing a particular line. Sometimes there are subtle reasons for the move order. They're trying to avoid certain variations or whatever. So they've got a particular line and they play it. And so you see all these, hundreds of games in this case, in this particular line. But if you look at, the moves I played, like e4 and e5, I mean, these are perfectly playable moves. It's not like there's something wrong with them. It's just that they're sort of not in fashion, I guess. Anyway, I castle, and we're in this main line Fianchetto variation of the King's Indian defense. And the main move here, it looks like, is c6. So let's take a look at the main line. I'm not familiar with this, like I said, so let's see how it normally is played. So c6 and h3. Okay, so I understand h3. Basically, you want to keep a knight out of this square so that you can safely put a bishop on e3. Again, it's not so common to take here, but to develop the queen to b6, putting pressure on the b-pawn and inhibiting the bishop from developing. Rook to e1, and now the exchange e takes d4. So I guess the exchange is part of the plan in this opening. And rook e8. Okay, and then this is a game from here. Let's go back to the game as it was actually played. My opponent took right away, which is also, I mean, that's main line, I suppose. It's just the second choice here. Takes, I take with a knight, only move, and then rook e8 would be the normal move here, putting pressure on the e-pawn. But this move, knight c5, also puts pressure on the e-pawn, and I think there's nothing wrong with it again. And my move, b4, maybe it's a little bit suspicious. Again, h3 is an idea here. Keep the knight or a bishop in this case as well from coming into the the g4 square. But b4, I mean, the thing about this, I'm kicking his knight. Maybe it goes to a worse square, and I'm gaining space on the queen side. But these pawns can be weak and can be undermined. So he plays his knight back to d7. It's interesting. That's one of the engine choices here. Knight e6 is the book move. But after this, we're finally out of the book. So let's just look at the notation tab. And, I have some sort of slight opening advantage here. I continue with bishop b2, and he plays a5. And all these moves are reasonable. I support it, and he exchanges. and then takes the rooks off. I'm not sure if that was necessary, but his rook was sort of hanging there. Let's see if we back up. I might have been tempted just to leave the tension there instead of exchanging right away. Although there's always, white always then has the option of pushing on, trying to gain more space on the queen side. But when you exchange, it sort of forces the rooks off because this rook is undefended over in the corner, so he can't just leave it there. He's got to trade it off. And then I went with the queen to the corner. It's setting up this battery here so that this knight would be pinned if my knights were out of the way. Well, not necessarily. The knight always could go to this square or this square to defend the bishop. But I just thought it was a cute, cute move. And not too bad, I guess. But knight b6 has made me wonder if I'd made a mistake, because this b-pawn is weak. The c-pawn, rather, is weak here. He's hitting it. So I played queen a2 to defend it. The engine says I could just play knight d5 and ignore it. I was tempted to play knight d5. But anyway, I chose the more conservative course here. Queen a2. Holding onto the pawn, he goes bishop e6, hitting it again. And now the engine is recommending just taking that bishop off, and it gives it a strong advantage, like this bishop e6 move was a mistake. I did not spot this in the game, so let's check it out. Knight takes, pawn takes, and then c5. Ah, okay, so I understand this. The c5 move hits the knight and unleashes the queen on this diagonal, and this is a weak pawn on e6. So, yeah, I have to agree that would have been a strong continuation there. So, yeah, it's interesting. So in this position, yeah, you have to be able to see these things. I mean, actually, taking the knight is something I really did. Taking the bishop is something I really didn't consider during the game. I was still thinking about defending this pawn, but of course, taking an attacker is one way of defending the pawn, and then recognizing that after the exchange, you've got a weak pawn on e6. That's the way you can spot these things. So the knight takes e6 should have been one of the moves you automatically think about, because it's one of the captures in the position. And I should have followed that up a few moves to see if there was something there. In my thinking, okay, I didn't. I just played knight d5, which, you know, maintains that usual slight advantage, but misses an opportunity to win the game. So pieces get exchanged, and he goes for the queen trade here. I didn't particularly think the queen trade was good for me, so I went to b3, and he went to a4, kind of insisting on the queen trade. And well, the engine agrees with me. Yeah. So right now I thought, well, I don't have any particularly great square to move the queen to. This is a good post for his queen. It puts pressure on my queen side here, which is a bit loose. This is an isolated pawn here. This bishop, if the queen isn't around, this bishop is undefended. So I decided to trade queens, and it also displaces his knight. So that's reasonable. And actually, the queen trade, the engine thinks this has favored white. So the bishop on a1, you know, maybe it looks funny, but it's got a great diagonal there. It's defended by the rook, and keeps his knight from coming into my camp here. His knight's really got nowhere to go but back to b3. So I'm doing okay here. He plays rook to e8, going after my weakness. And I play f3, just defending it. And he goes knight to d7. So maybe this, somewhere around here, white starts to get a significant advantage and maintain it. I think this move is partly the culprit. If we back up, instead of knight d7, the engine is recommending rook to d8. A bit funny, or b8. Yeah, hard to know what it's thinking, or c8. Just some rook move rather than a knight move. You know, there's no more pressure on these pawns, so it makes sense to move or relocate some of these pieces. Maybe it's just that the knight doesn't have much of a future on d7. Also, it blocks the defense. This c-pawn here is a weak pawn in black's camp, so he really needs to take care of that in some way. So knight d7 doesn't help in that regard. And so I went rook c1, going after it. Knight b5 first. Okay, with the same idea. I play knight b5 in a move, but rook c1. Maybe he still has a chance to defend here. says knight A to B6. Yeah, bringing this knight back. I was kind of expecting that. Instead, he played rook to C8, well, defending it. And now knight B5. So if we back up, yeah, I guess knight to B6, it just gives up the pawn. So I would be a pawn up at least in this position. Okay, but he went rook C8, holding on to the pawn. But now knight B5, and things are in a bad way because when this pawn moves, the D pawn is weak, so he can't really hold on to everything. He tries C6. I grab the pawn, and I'm hitting his rook, and he plays the move rook C7. So anyway, this is, if you didn't see the game, this is an interesting spot to look for tactics. And of course, you have to avoid looking at the chess engine display, which is automatically giving the tactic away. But maybe this is a good point to talk about how you can spot these tactics. I mean, you should notice right away this is a bit of a peculiar move. The rook really has no squares to go to from there, and it's not defended, so it's loose. And also the back rank is loose, so you automatically would be thinking about the move knight here to attack the rook. This square is out. Otherwise you might think of knight there, but you think about knight here attacking the rook. And then you notice that the rook also, I mean the knight also, in addition to hitting the rook, hits the bishop, which would be a double attack, except that maybe he has some, yeah, probably knight e8 wins immediately too. But it's even stronger because you notice that after you exchange bishops, he will have a king on that square and the knight to e8 will fork. And so that's the way you can discover a lot of these combinations. You look for the exchanges and then look for the tactics. So that's an exchange and fork. And so my opponent resigned here. He's going to be down a rook and his pawns. He's down some pawns too. So basically no hope. So pretty reasonable place to resign. Kind of a short game, but I thought there were some interesting points to it and nice little tactic at the end. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Leave any comments you have in the section below, and I will see you again soon. Bye.